The city of Sacramento was alive with the rhythmic pulse of the evening rush. The fading sun cast long shadows on the streets, illuminating storefronts, cafes, and the occasional jogger weaving through traffic. It was a moment suspended between the day's exhaustion and the night's unwritten possibilities. Marcus Johnson gripped the steering wheel of his sleek, midnight blue sedan with one hand, the other resting casually on the leather armrest. A man of discipline and quiet authority, he was heading home after another long but productive day at his downtown office. The smooth hum of the engine and the soft jazz playing through the car speakers helped ease the tension in his shoulders. He exhaled, allowing the comfort of routine to settle over him like a familiar embrace. Then it happened. A sharp burst of flashing red and blue lights flooded his mirrors, accompanied by the wail of a siren slicing through the city's ambient noise. Instinctively, Marcus's pulse quickened. He flicked a glance at his speedometer. He hadn't been speeding. Had he missed a stop sign? He was always careful. He signaled and smoothly pulled over to the curb, his mind already running through possibilities. Through the mirror, he could see a lone officer emerging from the patrol car, his silhouette broad, posture rigid. Something about the way he approached felt off. This wasn't just another routine stop. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had no idea his entire world was about to change. If you're invested in stories like this, real, raw, and thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe to Blackstruggles. Stay tuned for powerful narratives that shed light on important issues. What do you think about this situation? If you liked this story so far, comment 1. If you didn't, comment 0. And if you have no opinion, hit that subscribe button instead. And don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications. More powerful stories are coming your way. Marcus kept both hands on the steering wheel, his fingers steady despite the sudden spike of tension. His years of experience had trained him well, calm, measured, and always in control. The last thing he wanted was to escalate the situation. The officer, now fully visible under the glow of a street lamp, strode toward the driver's side window with deliberate authority. He was tall, mid-40s, with a buzz cut and an air of unquestioned confidence, perhaps too much of it. His uniform was pressed to perfection, the badge on his chest gleaming under the city lights. His expression, however, was unreadable, locked somewhere between suspicion and silent judgment. Marcus lowered his window smoothly. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice neutral. "License and registration," the cop said, not bothering with pleasantries. His tone was clipped, direct, as if Marcus had already done something wrong. Marcus didn't react. He simply reached over to his glove compartment, moving slowly, deliberately, before retrieving his documents and handing them over. The officer took them without a word, glancing at Marcus's face, then back at the ID. "You know why I pulled you over?" Marcus met the officer's gaze in the mirror. "Not entirely sure, no." The officer's lip curled slightly. "You didn't come to a full stop at that last light." Marcus frowned slightly. He had slowed down, sure, but he was almost certain he hadn't run the light. Still, he wasn't about to argue. "I see. I thought I had, but I understand." The officer didn't seem satisfied with the response. He took a step back, scanning Marcus more intently, as if looking for anything that might justify what was coming next. "You're not from around here, are you?" Marcus's brow furrowed slightly. That wasn't a normal follow-up question. "I moved here a few months ago," he answered, keeping his tone even. "My address is on the license." The officer nodded, but his expression darkened. "Were you headed in such a hurry?" Marcus suppressed a sigh. The shift in the officer's demeanor wasn't subtle. It was the kind of questioning that had nothing to do with a traffic stop and everything to do with something else. "Just heading home," Marcus replied, keeping his tone steady. The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he lingered, his gaze shifting between Marcus's suit, the car's pristine interior, and the ID in his hands. There was an unspoken judgment there, something simmering just beneath the surface. Something about Marcus bothered him. And Marcus knew exactly what it was. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Marcus could feel the shift. This wasn't just a routine stop anymore. The officer, whose name tag read K. Thompson, wasn't just checking for a minor infraction. He was searching for something more, something he had already convinced himself must be there. Thompson tapped Marcus's license against his palm, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Step out of the car for me." Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly, but he didn't let it show. He turned his head, meeting Thompson's gaze through the window. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" Thompson's jaw flexed. "I asked you to step out of the car." The unspoken message was clear. "Don't question me." Marcus let out a slow breath. He had been in situations like this before. He knew how easily they could spiral, how quickly a simple interaction could become something far more dangerous. But he also knew his rights. "Respectfully, officer, I don't believe I've done anything that requires me to exit my vehicle," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. Thompson's lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The threat was subtle, but it was there. Marcus considered his options. He could push back, demand a valid reason, but he knew how that would go. He had seen it play out too many times. The moment he asserted himself, Thompson would escalate. So, with a controlled exhale, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed open the car door. He stepped out slowly, standing to his full height, which put him just an inch taller than Thompson. The officer's eyes flicked over him, taking in the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the measured posture. There was a moment of hesitation, just a flicker, but it was there. "Hands where I can see them," Thompson ordered, motioning toward the hood of the car. Marcus complied, placing his hands flat against the cool metal, his movements deliberate. He could feel the officer's eyes on him, searching for anything that could justify what was happening. Thompson took a step closer, his presence looming. "We've had some incidents in the area," he said, the words dripping with implication. "Can't be too careful." Marcus turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Thompson. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans?" His voice was quiet, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. The question landed like a punch. For a brief moment, Thompson's composure faltered. Then his hand drifted toward his belt. Not to his gun, but close enough. Marcus felt the shift immediately. This wasn't about protocol anymore. It wasn't about a traffic stop. This was a test, a power play. And Marcus wasn't sure how far Thompson was willing to take it. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The cool evening air did nothing to lessen the heat radiating from this unspoken standoff. Marcus kept his hands firmly on the hood of his car, his every movement calculated and deliberate. He knew one wrong move could escalate this situation in ways neither of them would be able to take back. Officer Thompson lingered behind him, fingers tapping rhythmically against his belt. It wasn't quite his gun, but it was close enough to serve as an unspoken warning. "You seem real comfortable with how this works," Thompson muttered, his voice laced with something Marcus couldn't quite place: frustration. Suspicion? Maybe both? Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch, let Thompson feel the weight of his own words. Finally, he spoke. "I believe in transparency," Marcus said evenly. "If an officer stops me, I expect a clear reason. That's not too much to ask, is it?" Thompson scoffed, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "You got something to hide?" Marcus exhaled through his nose, still refusing to rise to the bait. "Nothing at all, officer." The way he said it, the unwavering steadiness in his tone, only seemed to irritate Thompson further. Then came the moment Marcus had been expecting. "Turn around," Thompson ordered, his voice clipped, the frustration barely concealed now. "I need to check for weapons." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Weapons?" He finally let a hint of incredulity seep into his tone. "Do I look like someone carrying a weapon?" Thompson's jaw flexed, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression: uncertainty, maybe even hesitation. But he recovered quickly, doubling down. "I'm not going to ask again." Marcus hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the sheer exhaustion of moments like this. He had seen this play out too many times before. The demand, the escalation, the fabricated justification that would follow. He was all too familiar with the script. But tonight, the script was going to change. Without a word, Marcus turned and placed his hands behind his head, complying just enough to avoid immediate conflict. Thompson moved in, hands patting down Marcus's sides, his touch just a little too rough, a little too long. It wasn't about searching, it was about asserting control. But Marcus didn't flinch. When Thompson stepped back, his expression was tight. "You're clean," he muttered, almost begrudgingly, as if irritated that he hadn't found something to justify his suspicions. Marcus turned slowly to face him. "Of course I am." His tone was light, almost casual, but the way he looked at Thompson sent a different message. Thompson was losing control of this situation, and he knew it. For the first time that night, Marcus saw it in his eyes: doubt. But the game wasn't over yet. And soon, Marcus would make his move. For a brief second, the street was eerily silent. The usual hum of the city, the distant honking, the chatter of pedestrians, the whir of passing cars faded into the background as Marcus and Officer Thompson stood locked in an unspoken battle of wills. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made witnesses hold their breath, sensing something big was about to happen. Thompson took a half step back, as if recalibrating, trying to regain control of the situation that was slipping from his grasp. He had expected compliance, intimidation, maybe even fear. But Marcus wasn't giving him any of those things. Instead, Marcus exuded an unsettling calm, a quiet authority that Thompson couldn't quite place, but it was getting under his skin. The officer clenched his jaw. He needed to reassert himself. "Turn around and put your hands on the hood," Thompson barked again, this time louder, more aggressive. "Now." Marcus didn't move. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice cool but firm, "you just patted me down. I have no weapons, I'm not a threat, and you still haven't given me a valid reason for this escalation. So, tell me, what exactly are you looking for?" Thompson's hand twitched toward his belt again. This time it wasn't just a subconscious reflex. It was a warning. "You think this is a joke?" Thompson snapped, stepping closer. His breath was hot, his presence overbearing. "You don't just get to question me. That's not how this works." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I think," he said evenly, "that respect is a two-way street, and right now I'm not seeing much of it." The words landed hard. Thompson's nostrils flared, his face flushed with anger. Then he made a mistake. "You people always," he stopped himself, mid-sentence, realizing what he was about to say. But it was too late. The moment hung in the air, thick and charged. A few passing pedestrians who had slowed to watch the scene exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "You people," Marcus repeated, voice soft but razor-sharp. Thompson took a step back, suddenly realizing he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He opened his mouth as if to backpedal, but before he could, Marcus reached into his pocket slowly. Deliberately, his eyes locked onto the officer's. Thompson's hand shot to his holster. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he spoke with measured precision. "I'm reaching for my badge." Thompson hesitated. A beat of silence. Then, Marcus pulled out a leather case and flipped it open. The polished badge inside gleamed under the streetlight. "Marcus Johnson," he said, his tone almost conversational, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Police Department." Thompson's eyes darted between the badge and Marcus's face, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. The balance of power had just shifted. Dramatically. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The polished Internal Affairs badge gleamed under the streetlights, its presence undeniable, its meaning inescapable. Officer Thompson blinked, his face paling as realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitched at his sides, but the bravado, the smug authority he had been wielding so confidently was gone. Marcus watched the emotions flicker across Thompson's face: shock, disbelief, anger, and then something else: fear. "Your Internal Affairs." Thompson's voice cracked slightly, and he hated himself for it. "That's right," Marcus said, slipping his badge back into his pocket. His tone was calm, almost casual, but the weight of his authority now bore down on the officer like a slow-moving avalanche. "And let's be very clear about something, Officer Thompson, you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The words hit like a hammer. Thompson took a step back, visibly rattled, glancing around as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. The small crowd of bystanders, some already holding up their phones, had grown more invested in the scene, their expressions a mix of curiosity and grim satisfaction. This is a setup," Thompson blurted, his voice defensive. "You." Marcus cut him off. "No, officer. This was a choice. Your choice. Every decision you made from the moment you walked up to my car. That was all you." Thompson's breathing was unsteady now. He looked like a man drowning in his own miscalculation. "This is how you operate, isn't it?" Marcus continued, his voice never rising, never faltering. "You profile. You intimidate. You escalate." He took a slow step forward. "And you never, ever thought it would come back to bite you." Thompson's mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing. The crowd murmured. People were recording. This was getting out of his control fast. Marcus could see it in his eyes. He was desperate to salvage this, to find a way to twist the narrative. But there was no escape. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said smoothly, stepping even closer. You're going to hand me back my license and registration. You're going to step away from my vehicle, and you're going to think very carefully about what you say next." Thompson hesitated. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled the documents from his chest pocket and thrust them toward Marcus. Marcus took them, tucking them back into his wallet without breaking eye contact. Then he dropped the final bombshell. "You'll be hearing from me again," Marcus said, lowering his voice just enough that only Thompson could hear the next words. "But next time, it won't be as the man you tried to harass on the side of the road. It'll be as the one deciding whether you're fit to keep that badge." Thompson visibly swallowed. His face was red, his confidence shattered. The crowd was still watching. The world had just seen him undone. And Marcus? Marcus knew this was only the beginning. By the time Marcus pulled away from the curb, his heartbeat had slowed, but his mind was already racing. He knew exactly what was coming next. Exposing a cop like Thompson wouldn't go unnoticed, especially inside the department. There was an unspoken code, a brotherhood that protected its own even when they didn't deserve it. And Marcus? He had just shattered that code in front of an audience. Less than an hour later, his phone buzzed. A restricted number. He knew better than to ignore it. "You just made a lot of enemies tonight," the voice on the other end said. It was low, steady, meant to intimidate. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his face betraying nothing. "That a threat?" A dry chuckle. "Just a reality check. You think internal affairs makes you untouchable. You start digging into the wrong people, and you'll find out real fast who actually runs this department." Click. Marcus stared at the phone, unsurprised but still annoyed. He had been expecting pushback, just not this fast. And then came the real fallout. The next morning, when he walked into his office at Sacramento PD's Internal Affairs Division, a heavy silence fell over the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Colleagues averted their eyes. He had been in this job long enough to recognize the shift in energy. Someone had gotten to them. Linda, his assistant, gave him a subtle nod before sliding a file across his desk. "You should see this," she murmured, her tone unusually tight. Marcus flipped it open. His stomach clenched. A formal complaint had been filed against him. Excessive force, abuse of power, unprofessional conduct. It was all fabricated, but that didn't matter. The goal wasn't to take him down, it was to dirty his name, to make him look just as corrupt as the officers he was trying to hold accountable. They wanted him cornered, isolated. They wanted him out. And the worst part, they weren't finished yet. In the weeks that followed, Marcus braced himself for the storm. Despite the fabricated allegations and covert attempts to tarnish his reputation, he refused to back down. With resolute determination, he gathered undeniable evidence, testimonies from brave officers, and heartfelt accounts from community members who had suffered under Thompson's regime and others like him. His investigation became a beacon of hope for those who believed in accountability and justice. As the internal inquiry unfolded, Marcus found unexpected allies emerging from every corner of the department, colleagues who had grown weary of the old ways and were ready to stand for truth. Public pressure mounted, and soon local media picked up the story. The fabricated complaint against Marcus was exposed as a desperate attempt by entrenched elements to silence reform. Community leaders and civil rights groups rallied behind him, their support a powerful testament to the changing tide. In a climactic hearing, evidence overwhelmed the resistance. The corrupt practices were laid bare before a panel of senior officials, and sweeping reforms were announced. Marcus's integrity and courage had not only exonerated him but had ignited a transformative movement within the department. The badge he wore now symbolized not just authority, but the promise of accountability, fairness, and a renewed trust between law enforcement and the people they served. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse that day, the weight of the past lifted from his shoulders. The dawn of a new era had arrived, a future where justice and compassion reigned, inviting every citizen to believe that change is not only possible but inevitable. Lessons from the story: accountability, justice, and the power of integrity. The story of Marcus Johnson is more than just a dramatic confrontation. It reflects real issues in today's society: police accountability, racial profiling, and the power dynamics between law enforcement and the public remain pressing concerns in communities across America. While most officers serve with integrity, those who abuse their power erode public trust and endanger the very system they swore to uphold. Marcus's story teaches us that courage and integrity matter. Standing up against injustice is never easy, especially when the system resists change. But silence enables corruption, and real reform only happens when individuals both within and outside institutions refuse to look the other way. For everyday life, this story reminds us to know our rights, stay informed, and hold those in power accountable. Whether in law enforcement workplaces or our communities, we must demand fairness and transparency. Change starts with awareness, but it thrives through action. Above all, the story reinforces that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about creating a system that values honesty, respect, and equal treatment for all. When people stand together for what's right, real change becomes possible.